Thank you very much, Craig, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. In the time I've got available tonight, I'm going to look at the Amiens Offensive primarily through the lens of the Australian Corps and its artillery. In the 6 weeks, beginning on the 8th of August, the Corps captured the area shown here in blue. I want to cover the artillery support for the initial breakthrough around Villers-Bretonneux, known by some as the Battle of Amiens. Subsequent attacks around Bray and Proyart, that's about a third of the way across. Mobile warfare between there and Peronne, and then the actions around Mont-Saint-Quentin at the end of the month. That's going to be a bit of a gallop, and I look forward to expanding on some of these issues in the question time. Now, by way of background, you'll all be aware that in early 1918, the Germans held this strategic initiative, and by June it launched 4 offensives without achieving any real success. Hamel was a sign that the tide was turning, but it was only when the final German offensive, the 5th one, on the Marne, a few weeks later was checked, that the Entente leaders felt confident enough to launch their own operations. They initially chose to free up the important rail junction of Amiens. Here, opposite the 4th British and the 1st French armies, the front line passed through Morlancourt, Villers-Bretonneux and Montdidier. The German defences, as we've heard already, were temporary, improvised, lacking in depth, manned by depleted divisions. Behind them, the countryside was little touched by war, until a line of 1915 trenches, which I've shown here with the blue dotted line, and then further east, substantial overgrown trench lines from 1916, shown in brown. The German forces were supplied through rail junctions at Peronne, Chaulnes and Roye, and the Entente armies were directed to strike at the latter two of those. 4th Army decided to mounted a combined infantry tank assault. The British 3rd Corps to attack north of the Somme, the Australian Corps in the centre, Canadian Corps on the right. The plan was to seize the German forward defences and gun positions, the Green Line, and then, with only a very short pause, push on to the Red Line, and then immediately exploit to the Blue Line, which was the 1915 trench line. The Australian Corps decided to do this by having 2 of its divisions take the Green Line and then push another 2 through to take the Red and Blue lines. This is the Corps allocation of artillery. It looks about the same as they had for Hamel, actually, but it was vastly superior to its German equivalent. It was backed up by sound ranging, survey, calibration and air observation resources. I'm not going to say a lot about air observation in this presentation because the next presentation will cover it. The key artillery arrangements for the battle were made at army level. Like Hamel, surprise was paramount. There would be no preliminary bombardment. Targets would be predicted. Normal activity continued while the forces were assembled secretly, and every gun, every field gun at least, was calibrated beforehand at a range in the back area. The seizure of the Green Line was assisted by a creeping barrage, as you can see on this map. The field guns, 1 to every 25 yards of front, although I think that's a bit too short, they opened with a little bit of smoke, but then they fired delay, HE with a delay fuse, or shrapnel, to allow the infantry to follow closely, keep the enemy under cover, and create haze and dust to hamper his observation. The field howitzers fired 200 yards in front of the field guns. The barrage was supplemented by a counter-battery fire plan for which unfortunately no map exists, and also by this heavy artillery fire plan, which again is timed to move forward as the infantry advances. The secret preparations, the barrages and the bombardments, they were prodigious feats, but they were derived, as we've seen at Hamel, from well-practiced techniques. The novel challenge here was providing artillery support for the seizure of the red and blue lines. It was met in part by the heavy artillery continuing the time bombardment and their counter-battery fire in depth. But for the field guns, there is no barrage. Once the Green Line was captured and the attacking divisions for the Red Line started to move forward, 6 field artillery brigades also moved forward, 3 to each attacking division, 1 to each attacking infantry brigade, and providing gun sections to go with the forward troops. These forces provided ad hoc fire support, controlled from observation posts on the Green Line, or mobile forward observers or liaison officers. A 60-pounder battery, so a heavy battery, was also given to each attacking division. Then, once the attack on the Red Line got underway, another 6 field artillery brigades moved forward, so that when those attacking divisions consolidated on the red and blue lines, each of them had 6 field artillery brigades to provide fire support should the Germans counterattack or should it be required. And by this time too, the first of the heavy artillery was up behind the Green Line. On the day itself, ground mist and the creeping barrage facilitated the complete rupture of the German front. And in the absence of depth positions, the mobile artillery support helped both the Australian and indeed the Canadian Corps to reach the blue line. The Third Corps on the left was less successful. The Fourth Army sought to maintain the momentum on the 9th of August by directing the Canadian and Cavalry Corps to continue the advance towards Chaulnes and Roye, and the Australian Corps to swing the line forward to Lyon. The 1st and 2nd Divisions, supported by a few tanks, initially sought to do so using ad hoc artillery support, but that proved successful against determined opposition in a strong tactical position, so both resorted to creeping barrages before finally capturing the position on the 11th of August. At the same time, the 3rd Division advanced the line on the left, again behind a creeping barrage. At this point, the Fourth Army was tiring, and Haig decided to hold its front and attack further north using another army. So the Battle of Amiens essentially ended on the 11th of August. There followed a week or so of relative quiet, during which the Australian Corps established divisional sectors, each with their own allocation of field and heavy artillery. The next major action took place on the 22nd and 25th of August. North of the river, the 3rd Division secured the town of Bray in 3 operations, each supported by a divisional creeping barrage. South of the river, covered by a corps creeping barrage, as you can see there, with heavy artillery and counter-battery fire in depth, and smoke in the barrage and smoke screens on the flanks, the 1st Australian and 32nd British Divisions advanced the corps line to Foissy-Beacon, Sheen and Airleville. Under pressure now on all fronts, the Germans began to withdraw, and in the Australian Corps area they moved towards Mont-Saint-Quentin and Péronne. This led to a second period of mobile warfare. Divisions patrolled forward with field artillery brigades in support of battalions and 18-pounder gun sections with forward companies For the gunners, the difficulties here were providing responsive communications between the guns, the observers and the infantry. They've only got telephone wire and visual signals. The other problem was the change of mindset to mobile warfare from static warfare. North of the Somme, to take positions around Suzanne and Curlew, the 3rd Division used creeping barrages and associated bombardment programs, occasionally supplementing these with flanking barrages or a jumping barrage, which is a barrage which jumps from one defensive position to another inside a creeping barrage. The heavy artillery pushed forward its 6 inches and 60 pounders, leaving the less mobile 8 inches and above behind. Each division had an affiliated heavy brigade and 60 pounders under infantry orders. The remainder of the heavy artillery provided general support, harassing, interdiction and CB fire in depth. When it became clear that he would not get across the Somme in front of Peronne easily, Monash decided to slip the 2nd Division sideways across the river near Clery and have its 5th Brigade attack Mont-Saint-Quentin on the morning of the 31st of August, while the 3rd Division advanced towards Bouchard. These were quick attacks, with orders issued late on the night of the 30th of August for a 0 hour around 0500 the next morning. Despite the short notice, the 3rd Division was able to implement a creeping barrage. The 2nd Division opted for a lifting barrage, with the field artillery brigades operating in lanes and times for each lift determined by a prospective infantry rate of advance. You can see there the roughly 3 lines of lift and the timings at the top. The blue crosses indicate where the supporting heavy artillery batteries were ordered to engage. The 3rd Division secured its objectives, but the 5th Brigade was unable to hold the crest of Mont-Saint-Quentin, so Monash ordered further attacks the next day. 3rd Division to continue to advance on the left, 6th Brigade, 2nd Division, capture the hill, 14th Brigade, 5th Division, advance on the right towards Peronne. Once again, time was short. The good old 3rd Division managed a creeping barrage, but the other 2 divisions used concentrations of field and heavy artillery on particular targets, lifting in accordance with a planned infantry rate of advance. So the resulting fire plan here looks quite different from any we've seen before, although it looked to me very similar to the quick attack fire plans we used to do 50 years later. At Mont-Saint-Quentin, it provided little assistance, and advance was only possible after further bombardment of the top of the hill. On the 14th Brigade axis towards Peronne, some progress was made, despite the fact that the infantry were not able to maintain the rate of advance and soon lost the fire support. The area was finally secured on the 2nd of September. The 2nd Division's artillery applied its fire, as you can see, in lanes, with standing barrages inside those lanes at various points, and again, gun sections travelling with the infantry. The 5th Division's gunners once again used a series of concentrations. After these actions, the Germans withdrew to the Hindenburg Line. Breaching those much more substantial defences required deliberate attacks with centralised planning of the necessary barrages, such as this one on the Hindenburg outpost line. But that's another story. In summary, in the Amiens Offensive, the Australian Corps advance was a mixture of set-piece battle and mobile warfare. At the set pieces, artillery command and control were centralised as far as practical, and the techniques generally centred on the good old creeping barrage, with no preliminary bombardment, predicted fire, and the increased use of smoke to provide protection for the tanks. What we're seeing here is actually the purpose of the barrage is changing or multiplying. Originally, these creeping barrages were to protect the infantry. They're now also to protect the tanks from German anti-tank fire. There's a number of battles here where they didn't provide this thing and the tanks just got knocked out. The exception to the creeping barrages was Mont-Saint-Quentin, where time pressures meant different techniques had to be adopted. In mobile warfare, command remained centralised. As far as I can see, the artillery brigades were not placed under command of the infantry brigades. They were allotted to them, and the control of their fire was decentralised. And that meant, of course, that the infantry brigade commander wasn't then worried about bringing up all those batteries, redeploying the batteries, doing those sorts of things. The field artillery brigade commander did that and then provided the fire support to the infantry. The gunners adapted well enough to mobile warfare, but they were reliant on wire and visual signalling, as I said, and that inhibited their ability to provide responsive fire support when it was needed. I'm going to finish it there. I've left out lots of things, as you have to in such a short presentation, but I'll be happy to take any questions you have later on.